I'm Dr. Stephen Davidson, the Sexual Integrity Coach located in Wilton Manors, Florida. Welcome to another episode of Adult Sex Education. Shame is a common subject in my work with clients, and it's a huge barrier to people feeling good about their sexuality and having intimate and fulfilling sexual relationships. I want to thank the subscriber who asked me to cover this subject. Right now, I'm mostly covering the topics that subscribers request. People frequently confuse guilt with shame or use the terms interchangeably. They're not synonyms. We feel guilt related to a specific action or inaction. It can often be easily alleviated with an amends or apology and forgiveness from the person we harmed. Shame is more specific to who we believe we are. It might result from a specific situation, but it can even be a situation in which our actions were completely innocent. Shame is a feeling about our overall existence. We don't simply believe we did a bad thing. We believe we are a bad person. Guilt says, I did something wrong that I now regret. Shame says, I'm unlovable and worthless. Guilt can be a healthy reflection on our behavior when we hold ourselves accountable and take action to right our wrongs. It often leads to lasting changes in behavior and therefore personal growth on a deep and meaningful level. Shame is the result of abuse, verbal, emotional, physical, or sexual, that often occurs early in life and leaves a lasting imprint on our self-confidence and self-esteem. Guilt can be short-lived and resolved. Shame can be a lasting result of trauma that never finds resolution. We're not born hating ourselves. We are not innately shameful about our bodies or our sexuality. We're born with these bodies, and much of our sexuality is the result of normal, primal human drives, which sustain us individually and as a species, and are influenced by both our environment and genetic composition. We learn to be ashamed of our bodies and our sexuality because of how it gets filtered in our culture at the time in history in which we live. Throughout world history, religion and politics have influenced how we judge ourselves and others as sexual beings, pertaining to our gender, sexual orientation, body type, and sexual behavior. These institutions establish rules, laws, and commandments that are based more on dogma than nature. They are used to control and limit our individual power and access to resources. On a micro level, some of us were individually shamed in childhood by parents or other authority figures who believed that shame was a reasonable way to teach us to conform to the dogma that the parent or authority figure had been groomed to conform to as well. Children are easily influenced by the words and actions of those that they rely on for survival and protection. It might appear to modify behavior short term, but it has long-term harmful consequences. Bullying and sexual harassment are other examples of how an individual can be shamed in a way that feels very personal and leads to lifelong negative conclusions about self-worth and rights to happiness. On a macro level, shaming occurs by institutions like religion or governments that target specific demographics of individuals and deny them basic human rights and access to resources. An entire group of people are collectively shamed for something that often lies outside their control, such as gender, race, or sexual orientation. Historically in the U.S., women were denied rights to vote until 1920 as a means of denying their voice in politics and keeping them subservient to men. When the birth control pill was approved by the FDA in 1960, single women in many states were denied access to it by lawmakers who wanted to limit their sexual freedom. It wasn't until 1974 in the U.S. that women were allowed to have a credit card in their own name, without permission from their husband. This prevented women from being able to leave abusive marriages or establish personal power as individuals. Until recent years, gay men and women have been denied access to housing, employment, and other human rights afforded to straight people. Today, trans people are fighting for the right to use a public restroom. Politicians, fueled by religious dogma, build their entire campaigns on limiting basic human rights for sexual minorities. under the pretense of religious freedom for those who oppose. These sweeping social policies collectively shame demographics of people deemed unworthy and undeserving, not because of something they did, but simply because of who they are as sexual beings. These policies send a message that shaming individuals on a micro level will be tolerated at school, at work, or in the community. On a macro level, these institutions condone hate speech and hate crimes by refusing to allow specific groups of people basic human freedoms. It is inhumane to publicly target any group of individuals for abuse simply because of who they are. Children witness this in their homes and communities, and if they can relate, they too will integrate shame into their sexual identities. When we speak of childhood sexual abuse, we're usually referring to direct touch, penetration, or exposure to sexual images. The trauma from these experiences is a result of the conclusions the individual comes to about themselves based on the abuse. They form negative and self-loathing beliefs about their bodies and their sexuality. They become shameful based on what happened to them, and this shame can impair their functioning personally, socially, occupationally, and prevent them from being able to establish healthy adult sexual relationships. Sexual abuse can also be emotional and verbal, even when no touch or penetration has occurred. The child still comes away with shameful conclusions about themselves. When carried into adulthood, these negative conclusions about the self can lead to anxiety, depression, addiction, and dysfunctional sexual relationships. When I talk about sexual integrity, I'm referring to one's right to claim their sexual truth, heal their sexual shame, and live their life in a way that is sexually fulfilling. I'm referring to relationships built on honesty and transparency instead of secrets and lies. My book, Sexual Integrity: Finding the Courage to Be Yourself, is a direct response to the amount of shame I've witnessed from clients that I've worked with over the past 35 years. Yes, some of them identified as gay, trans, or kinky, but you might be surprised to know that cisgender vanilla, straight men and women also carry a lot of shame about their bodies and sexuality. The book contains scenarios of men and women who overcame their sexual shame about their bodies, history of sexual abuse, as well as shame about erotic thoughts and desires, including kinks and fetishes. Witnessing another person be shamed individually or collectively as a group negatively affects everyone regardless of gender identity or sexual orientation. When we discover that someone we know is targeted for shame about their sexuality, we realize we can also be a target if our own thoughts or behaviors are ever determined by another to be a cause for social exile. This fear is a barrier to couples talking openly with each other about sex. It causes them to keep secrets from each other and prevents emotional and physical intimacy. In the coming weeks, I will share more thoughts about sexual shaming, its consequences, and how to overcome its negative influence on your life. I'm Dr. Stephen Davidson, the Sexual Integrity Coach. I hope you will like this video and subscribe to this channel. Please check out my website at sexualintegritycoach.com. There you'll find links to my book, Peaceful Mind, Peaceful Life, the Guidebook to Happiness, as well as Sexual Integrity: Finding the Courage to Be Yourself. Both books are available on Kindle, Amazon, Audible, and fine booksellers everywhere.